When our second son was born, he was born, what, 9 pounds, 6 ounces, something like that. He was huge. And I don't want to tell the whole story. I mean, he was massive, and we didn't expect it. This exists in our family, but we didn't expect this to take place. Our first one was, what, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, I think, something like that. Longer, but much smaller. Anyway, our second son was breastfed, and he was a big boy. And so, you know, it's not an infinite amount, you know, that goes in that natural, wonderful process where a mother can feed her child. So when she would run out, Jude, that's his name, was none too pleased. And so what he used to do was he would throw himself back. And my wife, this petrified my wife. My second son, I don't think knew I even existed for the first year of his life until he started getting spoon-fed solid food, and I could be a part of that, you know, and then he, you know, fell in love with me and so on. But when he would throw himself back, again, my wife was scared of this. I mean, this would happen when we were at the table, you know, and other places where if she didn't catch him, you know, it would do him great harm. So I told her she should just let him fall, you know, make sure you're in a safe place, either on the bed or somewhere where it's a cushioned fall. But if you let him fall, then he'll learn that's not the way to go about things. And it took her some time to finally do it. But once she did, I think it was after the first time, it might have been after the second time, he no longer did it. Now, you know, this might make me look like the bad guy, but I just think this very minorly illustrates how God can use, you know, seemingly adverse situations and circumstances to teach us more about goodness, more about His goodness, to reflect His goodness. Okay, so as we continue our study in the book of Job, again, this is what we're considering, the purpose of suffering, a glimpse into the purpose of suffering. Again, we are limited as to how much we can understand these things, but we are also called to explore God's creation. And that's what we're really going to get into largely today. In the 4th chapter of the first epistle of Peter, in verse 19, he says, "Therefore let those who suffer according to the will of God commit their souls to Him in doing good as to a faithful Creator." This is what I was kind of getting at in the last 2 sessions, and I hope we can start finally illustrating and making use of that a little bit more clearly. When I came across the divine imperative, and we'll consider that portion here briefly, that drew me back into the creation of God. God is the creator. Okay, He sustains life, but we wouldn't be able to consider suffering at all if He never created anything. If He never created and spoke all that is into being, we would have nothing to talk about because we wouldn't be able to speak. Now, what I want to share, again, I do want to share the portion that really lifted me to God and awakened me into His divine majesty, where I saw how limited I was. You know, I was in this journey. I didn't want to be a Christian, and so I wanted to learn all about God, exhaust the nature of God, and so on. Remember, we talked about that book that I read, which began, you know, mystery is the vital element of dogmatics. And when I read this, I was shaken. So in the 11th book of his confessions, of Augustine's confessions, in chapter 8, now before this, he says much about this. I would again implore anyone, it's a sad fact that many Christians don't take up reading Augustine, in particular his confessions. This chapter is filled with such wisdom and insight and understanding and questions you won't even think to ask, and considerations that won't enter your mind unless you come across it by one who has thought of these things. But chapter 8 begins, "Why is this, I ask of thee, O Lord my God? I see it after a fashion, but I do not know how to express it, unless I say that everything that begins to be and then ceases to be begins and ceases when it is known in thy eternal reason that it ought to begin or cease, in thy eternal reason where nothing begins or ceases. And this is thy word, which is also the beginning, because it also speaks to us." This is where, "Thus in the gospel he spoke through the flesh, and this sounded in the outward ears of men, so that it might be believed and sought for within, and so that it might be found in the eternal truth, in which the good and only Master teacheth all his disciples. There, O Lord, I hear thy voice, the voice of one speaking to me, since he who teacheth us speaketh to us. But he that doth not teacheth us doth not really speak to us, even when he speaketh. Yet who is it that teacheth us, unless it be the truth immutable? For even when we are instructed by means of the mutable creation, we are thereby led to the truth immutable. There we learn truly as we stand and hear him, and we rejoice greatly because of the bridegroom's voice, restoring us to the source whence our being comes. And therefore, unless the beginning remained immutable, there would then not be a place to which we might return when we had wandered away. But when we return from error, it is through our gaining knowledge that we return. In order for us to gain knowledge, he teacheth us, since he is the beginning, and speaketh to us." Jay, will you have this? Thank you. So, this awakened me not only in the divine imperative in speaking all things into creation, but obviously this is linked to the Word of God coming in the flesh. And so those examples that we considered last week by the command of the Son of God, he also has this self-same power. Now, when God comes to Job, we've spoken of that he begins with creation, ultimately. So I just want us to notice here that God doesn't send Job into a journey of some esoteric, transcendent beyond, nor does he call Job to look at himself within, look for the ground, beneath your being and so forth, and find yourself. He shows him the world. He essentially shows him creation. Jesus implores us to consider the lilies of the field, the lilies of the field. And so God is basically taking Job and perusing the garden, the great garden of creation. God loves his creation. And when it talks about the snow and the hail and so forth, he talks about this as like a treasury. God sees snow and hail as we see gold. What's priceless to God is somewhat cheap and insignificant to us. He loves his creation. He loves his creation. So I want us to get a grasp. We need to get a grasp as to what God is doing here. Now, we all remember in Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So this was the very beginning. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. Now, creation is analogous. There's a limit to this analogy, but it's very analogous to salvation. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He also created us. We were also made. But when we were born in sin, we are born in darkness, blind to the things of God, deaf to the things of God. But the Spirit of God hovers over this void darkness, this vast darkness, and he hovers over. And then the eternal Word speaks, "Let there be light," into a darkened soul, into a darkened mind, into a darkened heart. We are awakened at last into the morning dawn of salvation. So as he is sending him through creation as well, let us remember this is also a reflection of his divine light being given to us. He is the light of the world, and he has given us his light, taken us out of the darkness and into his glorious radiance and his refulgence, his divine presence. Okay, now let's finally get back to Job, okay? Setting this up now, okay? Again, though, this is why we were leading into where Job is. God comes to Job and as a father, and asks him many questions. But again, this is Job being in the presence of the holy of holies. And he begins, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? This is really the measuring line. To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for glory. Now the morning stars are most likely Mars and Venus, or Venus and Mercury, and the sons of God are the angels. Let us also remember, the angels were created beings, were creatures before man, and evil existed before our fall. There was a third of the angels fell, and Jesus speaks of this. So the entrance of sin into God's creation began before we came. The reason for that is mysterious. We're not privy to all the details. Much is left into the sovereign wisdom of God and his discernment. He knows, and that must be our resting place. That must be our peace, that though we might not know, he knows. Okay, so, or who shut in the seas with doors when it burst forth and issued from the womb? He's talking about the sea being given birth out of the womb. He's characterizing the waters as being born. So out of this womb came all these waters. When I made the cloud, now, obviously, this isn't an actual true scientific cosmology. Briefly, because right now we are considering the creation by the creator, okay? Whereas the modern intellectuals of our time essentially say the universe is self-created. It came from nothing. And so, we're derided for believing in this God who exists. You know what doesn't exist? You know what definitely doesn't exist? Nothing. By definition, nothing exists. Okay, so if there was ever nothing, there would still be nothing. But God, this is, however, it is worth, I hope, and it shouldn't be all that surprising. This is poetic language, not really illustrating to us the scientific ways that these were done. The people who read this, Job hearing this, wouldn't have thought that whatsoever. Okay, this is poetic language coming from the mouth of God. When I made the clouds its garment, and thick darkness its waddling den. There's the darkness. There's the darkness. I'm sorry. Let me go back to the science. Because these are the kings and the counselors who we've considered in the second psalm, who come together to counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. These people are looking for a worldly utopia. This is the cause of the scientific endeavor and so forth, to lead us into some worldly utopia. That is foolishness, and Jesus makes this clear. We are derided for believing in an eternal divine paradise. You know what will never come? A worldly utopia built by men. This has been tried since the very beginning. It's a fool's errand. It's a fool's errand. And God in heaven, who sits in heaven, laughs and holds them in derision. We are mocked. Jesus was mocked. Again, the problem with people is that they hate the holy. They love hearing about the love of God. Everybody loves to hear about the love of God and the mercy of God and the grace of God. Look, we must not undermine these. These are essential, but God is holy, and he is also absolutely just. These are the things people don't want, and he is a God of wrath. There is a day of judgment. Christ came for judgment. Remember, he came to save, and therefore he came also to judge those who weren't going to come to him. But he spoke and gave some eyes to see, just as the man born blind. And others he drove further into darkness and despair, until ultimately that final darkness, that final and eternal place of darkness where there is no more light any longer. And the wailing and the gnashing of teeth is essentially less of the flames, less of the torment, as much as it is this eternal separation in utter darkness. Outer darkness is how the Gospels describe it. Absolutely, the furthest ends of the universe, or furthest away from glory. Utterly cast off, utterly cast away. People hate this. People hate this. And I just think, there's something to even these modern intellectuals who see that things spring from nothing, and ultimately what happens when you die? Well, you return to nothing, I guess. Nothing happens when you die. It's as religious as it can get. It's meaningless. It's absolute nihilism, but it's as religious as you can get. Something coming from nothing is a miracle God can't even do. He spoke things into being, but he existed. He's always existed. He is eternal. From him came all things. He has the power of being in and of himself. This is wisdom. This is knowledge. This is discernment. And this is why God is taking Job back to the creation. Where were you, Job? Where were you? Where were we when God created the heavens and the earth? We were in the mind and in the heart of God. All of his saints, he knows everything, even the fallen men and women. He knows these people, but he knows us with a divine affection. So when he says, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Job, you were in my mind. You were in my heart. I did all of this, not only for you, but partly just for you, Job. You didn't have to be. You didn't have to exist. I chose to bring you to myself. I chose to bring you into this world. And now I chose to bring you to myself by my divine word. So, when I made the clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, when I fixed my limit for it, a better translation would be against it, and set bars and doors. So here are doors again. In one sense, the waters were given birth. They poured out from this womb and so on. And then in another sense, this door shuts them in or out, but ultimately traps them. So one is a letting out, almost like a freedom, a liberation. Another is kind of an imprisoning. But remember, we've considered some of this, and so he'll get back to this. When I said, this far you may come, but no farther, and here your proud waves must stop. This goes into, commentators, you will see a vast array of different interpretations of these. I do think there's a moral framework in here. And he does talk about the wicked. So I do think there's a moral framework in here. The tempestuous waves of the fallen men and women who remain in the darkness. Jesus refers to them as the blind leading the blind, and they will all fall into the pit. So, but the tempestuous seas of the fool who says in his heart there is no God, just as in Psalm 2, why do the nations rage and the people plot together? People plot a vain thing. These are the waves. These are the waves that Jesus rebuked. These are the winds. This is a storm. These are the seas that Jesus himself rebuked. In creation, he did the same thing. He did the same thing. Here, your proud waves must stop. There must be a land upon which to put my sons and daughters. Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, and the wicked be shaken out of it? So, have you commanded the morning since your days began? Now, he doesn't really talk about, he will, but this has less to do with when he spoke light into being. This really has to do less with the creation of the day and night, as much as the miracle that it takes place every day. This is something I've alluded to before. But the fact that the sun rises, and again, we know that that's not physically how it takes place, but the sunrise and the sunset are absolutely beautiful. And we take these things for granted. The beauty of creation. The beauty of creation. And then he goes into certain creatures who we will consider. He talks about the ostrich, and ostriches are kind of silly little animals. They're really fast, and behemoth and leviathan. I'm sure many who are listening or watching this cannot wait for us to consider behemoth and leviathan. And there are different conjectures, and I'm not going to give you mine, but one is that behemoth is a hippopotamus, and the leviathan is a crocodile. And if you think about a hippopotamus, why did God create a hippopotamus? They're dangerous creatures. They're dangerous creatures, but they're kind of funny looking. Come on, big, awkward sized head, a silly little tail. What's that for? So why? The same question is asked about suffering. I don't know why he made the hippo. I know it's for his glory. The same can be said of suffering. And so this is what he's asking. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. These are all for my glory. Now, we are going to kind of stop here. We're taking our time through here. But I did want to make the salient point that, remember, and it's true, when Satan came, he accused Job of fearing God for all of his blessings and for his protection and so on. But he was also accusing God. Essentially, this is the only reason he believes in you. Maybe if you didn't bless your people so much, they would curse you to your face. This is what they would do. So this is on you, and this is on Job. Essentially, Satan, the accuser, the adversary, was testing God, and he was also testing Job. Throughout this, not only is Job vindicated, God is glorified and magnified. Satan accused Job again. Does he fear you for naught? Does he fear you for nothing? And yet, take all this away. And then he does. And Job faithfully says, the Lord is given, the Lord is taken. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Another scene. Yeah, well, you didn't harm him. You give him this great health. You sustain him in his lifetime. Take this away. This is why all the other people, I'm going to and fro on the earth and so on. The people who curse you to your face certainly seem poorer than Job, seem more destitute, have more physical maladies. Touch him with your hand, and he will surely curse you to your face. Not once did Job even get close. He said things without knowledge. Also, to go back, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? This really goes into the counsel of God, his determinate plan in creation and sustaining creation in all things. So who is this who darkens counsel by words with my counsel, ultimately the divine counsel, by words without knowledge? Yet not once, even when he was implored to do so by his wife, he not once cursed God. He maintained his integrity. And maybe I should have done this at the outset, but better late than never, I guess. The word integrity, the etymological derivation, I mean, simply put anyway, to give a definition, really talks about all of the man or the woman, you know, one who has integrity anyway, all of the good traits integrate with one another. They're a composite whole. They're somewhat distinct and individual, yet they're integral. They integrate with one another. This is integrity. This is integrity. So though he had many questions, and though he wanted a court case with God, and he needed a mediator, he never cursed God. His friends thought he did, essentially, accusing God and so on, because he's wondering why. Why this suffering? I haven't done anything. Why this suffering? The answer, the one that we can know for certain, this is for God's glory. As he vindicates his servant Job, he also vindicates and glorifies himself. The devil will never win a battle with the Lord. And so, though he prowls around as a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour, we have the Lion of the tribe of Judah. I love C.S. Lewis's description of Aslan in Narnia. He says, he's a good lion. He's a good lion, but he's not a tame lion. I love that description. It just puts it so succinctly. He's a good lion, and we can trust him. But let us also remember that we cannot tame him. We cannot control him. He is not under our command. In fact, all of the animals, except for the horses, are wild animals. They are not domesticated animals. So I find this fascinating. And we will get into that when we talk more about the animate nature of God in and through his living creatures. But why the hippo? Why the crocodile? You know, I found out these guys run like 35 miles an hour. I thought if I ever came across one, I had a chance to escape. I can't run 35 miles an hour. I don't like to run. So I would have no hope. So as we continue, again, we are going to take our time with God's response and God's answer with Job. Again, considering suffering and in the lives, anyway, of the saints of God as it relates to creation, in and through creation, through the divine creator of heaven and earth, and we ourselves, and also the great Redeemer. So he is the creator, he is the sustainer, he is the Redeemer, he is all the good that we need, out of whom came all of these things. And remember, he blessed all of it, save that man was alone. It is not good that man should be alone. We have our paraclete, we have our counselor, we have a fellowship with God, but he wants other creatures for his creatures. He wants other men and women for his men and women. He wants a relationship with us, but he wants us to have a relationship with all our brothers and sisters, just as Christ prayed, Father, may they be one, even as we are one. It is not good that man should be alone, either left to his own conjecture and so on, and sadly, not, still alone through the dark counsel of his friends. Yet, he is not cast off, and he never curses God. And God brings him back to his original creation, and then he takes him through his garden, again, just as Jesus says, let us consider the lilies of the field. May we consider his creation, all things that are, and see him in it all. Praise God.